Victor Langston's voice thundered through his empty mansion as he hurled his crystal glass into the fireplace. "My children only love my money, not me." His hands trembled, veins rising against skin that carried 70 years of battles won, but family lost. At that very moment, a ragged little girl stood barefoot at his gate, clutching a lopsided cake she'd bought with her last coins. She whispered, "Happy birthday, sir. You don't have to be alone." How can the poorest child give the richest man the only gift he truly needed? What do you feel when you hear this? Golden Gate Park in San Francisco was alive with laughter that late October evening. Families picnicked on the grass, children shrieked with joy as they chased one another, and couples strolled hand in hand beneath the golden leaves that tumbled from the trees. In the middle of all that color and motion sat Victor Langston alone on a bench near the duck pond. His cashmere coat, carefully pressed and far too expensive for such a casual place, could not protect him from the chill that came not from the ocean breeze but from the silence inside his own life. Victor was 68 years old, a man who had built an empire in Silicon Valley, whose name appeared on buildings, hospitals, and scholarships. For decades, headlines had painted him as a visionary, the kind of leader who reshaped industries. But here, away from boardrooms and spotlights, he was just a man on his birthday, with no one to share it with. His phone lay heavy in his pocket, stubbornly quiet. He had checked it a dozen times that afternoon, hoping for even a single call, a short message, something from his children. Nothing came. He had 3 grown children, each living their own glamorous lives in Los Angeles. They had inherited his taste for wealth, but none of his discipline. When his wife Eleanor passed away 15 years ago, Victor buried his grief in work and money. At first, he thought showering his children with luxuries would ease the distance his ambition had created. But money turned into the very wedge that pushed them farther away. They saw him now not as a father, but as an endless fountain of credit, a man to be tolerated rather than loved. He sat straighter on the bench, his posture still impeccable, yet his eyes betrayed him. They carried the weariness of a man who had won every public battle and lost every private one. Around him, the joy of families only amplified his emptiness. A young father tossed his toddler into the air, their laughter ringing clear against the rustle of leaves. Victor closed his eyes and remembered when his own son was that age, when Eleanor would clap her hands and cheer as the boy laughed. He had missed most of those moments, choosing conference calls over playgrounds. Regret had a way of sneaking up on him at times like this. He exhaled, watching his breath mingle with the cool air, when he heard a faint shuffle of footsteps. Opening his eyes, he saw a small girl standing a few feet away. She couldn't have been more than 7, though her tiny frame and tattered clothes made her look even younger. Her dark hair was tangled, her sneakers worn through at the toes. She hugged her arms across her chest as though the coat she wasn't wearing could be imagined into existence. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice hesitant but sweet. Victor blinked, startled that anyone had approached him at all. "Yes? Why do you look so sad?" Her eyes, large and unguarded, studied him with a kind of honesty he hadn't felt in years. He thought about brushing off the question, about saying he was fine, but something in her face kept him still. He swallowed and answered carefully. "It's my birthday today." Her head tilted as though she hadn't heard him correctly. "Your birthday. So where's your party?" A bitter smile flickered across his lips. "There isn't one." Her frown was immediate, indignant in a way only a child could manage. Nobody should be alone on their birthday, not ever. Victor felt the words lodge in his chest. For years, he had sat through board meetings where people flattered him, negotiated with him, begged him. Yet this barefoot stranger's outrage at his loneliness struck deeper than any of those carefully rehearsed speeches. "Don't you have family?" she asked, stepping closer. "I do," he said softly. They're traveling, very far away. She bit her lip, as if weighing something far heavier than her small shoulders should carry. That's not right, she whispered. Then louder, tomorrow, I'm going to bring you something special. I promise. Before Victor could respond, she spun on her heel and dashed toward the line of trees, her small figure swallowed by the shadows. He sat there, frozen, staring after her, wondering why his heart felt both heavier and lighter at the same time. Later that night, Victor returned to his mansion on Nob Hill. The house was immaculate, polished marble floors, reflecting soft pools of light, but the silence pressed down like a weight. He ate dinner at the long dining table alone, the clink of silverware echoing in the vastness of the room. The housekeeper moved quietly in the background, careful not to disturb him. He pretended to read reports from one of his companies, but his mind kept circling back to the little girl's eyes. They had not looked at him with calculation, not with expectation, but with a simple and direct concern. Why are you sad? He could not remember the last time anyone had asked him that. When the night grew late, he climbed the stairs and paused outside the guest bedrooms that had once belonged to his children. He opened one door, gazing at the untouched furniture, the frozen memory of a life when the house was filled with noise. He closed it, quietly, leaned against the frame and whispered into the empty air nobody should be alone on their birthday. And though he told himself he did not believe in promises made by strangers, he found that he was waiting for tomorrow in a way he hadn't in years. The morning light slid across the bay and painted San Francisco in soft gold. Victor Langston woke earlier than usual, restless, though he told himself it was just habit. He dressed in his usual precision, knotting a navy blue tie his late wife used to say made him look less severe. He moved through the house the way he always did, rooms echoing with absence, but today his steps had a faint quickness to them. He wouldn't admit it aloud, but he was waiting for something or someone. By 10 o'clock, the silence had grown unbearable. Victor set down his coffee and walked to Golden Gate Park, convincing himself he only wanted the crisp air. The park was quieter than the night before. A few joggers passing a mother pushing a stroller, the faint smell of roasted nuts drifting from a vendor's cart. He sat on the same bench by the pond, feeling slightly foolish for hoping. The seconds ticked into minutes, the minutes into an hour, and he nearly stood to leave when he saw a small figure darting between the trees. It was the girl. She was clutching something with both hands, walking carefully as though each step risked losing her treasure. When she reached him, her face lit up. "Happy birthday, Mr. Victor." She called, her voice carrying across the quiet. She placed the object on the bench beside him, a small cake, lopsided and rough. Its icing spread unevenly, a single candle stuck in the center. Victor's throat tightened. "Lila," he managed, remembering the name she had whispered the night before. "Where did you get this?" She beamed with pride. "I made it." "Well, I helped. Mrs. Alvarez at the bakery let me use her oven. She even gave me a little sugar. But I bought the flour and cocoa myself." The words struck him like a blow. He studied her thin hands, the chipped nails, the way her shoes barely held together. "What money did you use?" She shuffled her feet, eyes lowering. "The coins I saved, from people who gave me change down by the pier." Victor's chest ached. He thought of his children, each spending tens of thousands in a single night on a party in Los Angeles or Monte Carlo, while this child had emptied her pockets of the only security she had to bake a cake for a man she had just met. "That money," he said softly, "you needed it to eat." Lila shrugged, as if hunger were a minor inconvenience. "But today's your birthday. It's more important you're happy." The simplicity of the statement nearly undid him. His vision blurred. He hadn't wept in years, not even at Eleanor's funeral, but now he felt the dam crack. He blinked quickly, unwilling to let the tears fall, and forced a smile. "You remembered." "Of course," she said, her grin widening. She pulled a match from her pocket, struck it clumsily, and lit the crooked candle. "Make a wish, Mr. Victor. My mama used to say birthday wishes are the strongest." Victor stared at the flame, then at the little girl who stood before him, waiting with pure expectation. He thought of all the birthdays he had spent in glass towers with champagne and hollow laughter, none of which had touched him. Here, a 6-year-old girl had given him more than any banquet ever could. He closed his eyes, wished not for more wealth or longer life, but for a chance, just one chance, to love rightly. When he opened them, he leaned forward and blew out the candle. Lila clapped her hands, her laughter rising like music through the trees. "Now we eat it," she declared, tearing the cake in two with her small hands. She offered him the larger piece. He shook his head. "This cake is yours. You worked for it, you spent your coins. No, Mr. Victor, I made it for you. And anyway," she added with a mischievous grin, "my belly is used to being empty. Yours isn't." The humor, delivered with such innocence, cracked open something inside him. He took the piece, biting into the rough sponge, tasting sugar cocoa and the unmistakable flavor of sacrifice. He swallowed hard. "It's the best cake I've ever had." Her eyes glowed at the praise as though she had been given a crown. For a moment they sat in silence, the breeze rustling through the branches, ducks cutting smooth trails across the pond. Then Victor asked quietly, "Where are your parents?" "Lila," the girl hesitated, her small fingers picking at the crumbs in her lap. "My mom. She died when I was little. I remember her voice singing to me, that's all." "My dad. He lost his job, got sad then, started drinking. One day he left and didn't come back." Victor's breath caught. "And where do you live now?" "Sometimes at the shelter, sometimes church, but mostly the street. It's freer there. Nobody bosses me around." He could not speak for a moment. She was 6 years old, carrying truths that should never belong to a child. He remembered his own son at 6, opening a toy robot on Christmas morning, his face full of joy. Victor had bought it to make up for missing the holiday dinner. He thought the gift was enough. Now he saw what he had done, traded presents for money, affection for objects. "Lila," he said at last, voice thick, "would you like to spend tonight with me just for dinner? A warm meal, a safe place to sleep?" Her eyes widened. Suspicion flickered. First life had taught her not to trust quickly. Why, she asked. He searched for the truest words. "Because you gave me the most precious gift I've ever received. You reminded me what it means to be human." The wind carried away the last wisp of smoke from the candle. Lila studied him, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but only if you let me help wash the dishes." Victor chuckled, the sound surprising even himself. He stood, offering his hand. She slipped hers into his without hesitation. As they walked out of the park past families who barely noticed them, Victor felt something stir inside him. He had thought, long dead, hope. The chauffeur raised his brows when Victor appeared at the gates of Nob Hill with a ragged little girl by his side. Victor simply said, "She's with me." And for the first time in decades, when he stepped into the mansion, he no longer felt entirely alone. The marble floors of Victor Langston's mansion echoed with a different kind of sound that evening. Instead of the usual quiet shuffle of staff or the hollow thud of his own footsteps, there was the unmistakable chatter of a child. Lila walked through the grand hallway with wide eyes, trailing her fingers along the carved banister, stopping to admire the tall paintings on the walls. For her, this was another world entirely, one she had only glimpsed through shop windows or movies on the library's small television. Victor watched her with a mix of amusement and unease. It felt strange to have life in these rooms again. The air no longer seemed so heavy, the silence no longer suffocating. "You can look at whatever you like," he said gently. "This house has been waiting for someone curious." She turned back to him, her face glowing under the crystal chandelier. "It's so clean. How do you keep it like this?" He smiled faintly. "Other people do it for me, though when I was your age, I had chores. My father insisted on it." Lila wrinkled her nose. "I don't like chores, but I like feeling useful." Later at dinner, she sat at the enormous table, her small frame dwarfed by the high-backed chair. The chef had prepared roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh bread, but she ate cautiously at first as though uncertain the food was really hers. Victor urged her on. "Eat as much as you want. No one here will take it away." She hesitated only a moment before digging in, and soon her plate was clean. She looked embarrassed, but Victor found himself smiling in a way he hadn't in years. It wasn't the polished manners of society dinners that moved him. It was the sight of a hungry child finally satisfied. After the meal, she insisted on helping clear the plates. "I promised I'd wash dishes," she said firmly. Victor laughed, but when he saw her carry the heavy plate with both hands, he let her. She stood on a stool in the kitchen sleeves, rolled up scrubbing with more determination than skill. He realized then that she wasn't only grateful, she wanted to belong. In the days that followed, their bond deepened in quiet but powerful ways. Victor introduced her to his library, a room lined with leather-bound books and shelves stacked with novels, histories, and poetry. She pulled down a thin volume of fairy tales and curled up on the couch to read aloud. Her voice stumbled over long words, but he listened intently, correcting gently when she asked. She reminded him of nights long ago when Eleanor had read to their children back before ambition had swallowed their evenings. One afternoon, he brought out a chess set carved from ivory, a gift he'd once received from a European king. "Have you ever played?" he asked. She shook her head, eyes wide at the gleaming pieces. "Is it like checkers?" "More complicated, but I think you'll learn quickly." They sat across from each other, and he taught her how each piece moved. She caught on faster than he expected, her small hands moving pawns with confidence. When she trapped his rook by accident, she laughed, clapping her hands. "I beat you." Victor grinned, conceding the piece. "You're a natural strategist. I may have to watch my fortune with you around." Their evenings grew into a rhythm, reading, playing games, sharing meals. For the first time in years, Victor came home from his office early, eager to see her. His staff noticed the change. The butler confided quietly, "Sir, the house feels alive again." Victor only nodded, unwilling to reveal how much the child had already altered the course of his heart. But with joy came shadows. Victor's phone began to ring more often, not with birthday wishes, but with sharp, entitled voices. His eldest son demanded to know why his monthly allowance had been reduced. His daughter accused him of favoring some new companion. Victor deflected, saying only that he was reevaluating his finances. But the calls grew more frequent, more bitter. His children, long accustomed to unchecked access, sensed change and grew suspicious. One evening, after another heated exchange, Victor sat in his study with Lila sketching beside him. She had taken to drawing with pencils he bought her, filling pages with simple pictures, houses, trees, smiling faces. That night, she slid a sheet across the desk. It showed a house with 2 windows and a door. Inside, 2 stick figures stood hand in hand. She had written their names above them, Lila and Mr. Victor. He stared at it, throat tight. "Why just us 2? He asked quietly. "Because it feels safe that way," she replied. "No one yells. No one leaves." He wanted to tell her that people always leave eventually, that love had cost him more than anything that his own children had turned away. But he couldn't. Instead, he reached for her drawing and said, "Then let's keep this house safe." the days continued with small but profound moments. Victor took her to the doctor for a checkup, sitting beside her in the waiting room like any other guardian. He bought her a set of new clothes, though she insisted on keeping her old sneakers because they still work. They took short walks near the bay, and she laughed when the wind tangled her hair into wild knots. Each laugh chipped away at the fortress around his heart. But the storm was gathering. Victor's children had begun comparing notes, their irritation growing into alarm. They had heard whispers of him spending time with a child no one knew, of money being shifted, of decisions being made without their consent. They gathered in Los Angeles not to ask with concern, but to plot with resentment. They believed something or someone was threatening what they saw as their birthright. Victor sensed the coming conflict but refused to let it overshadow the present. That night after dinner he sat with Lila by the fire. She leaned her head against his arm, drowsy from cocoa. He looked down at her, realizing how quickly affection had turned into responsibility, and responsibility into love. For the first time in decades, he was not afraid of what tomorrow would bring. He was afraid only of losing what he had found. The first sign of trouble arrived on a Saturday morning when Victor Langston's children appeared at the gates of his mansion unannounced. Black sedans lined the curb on Nob Hill, and 3 adults stepped out dressed in designer suits and guarded expressions. James, the eldest, carried himself like a man entitled to control his sharp jaw set in determination. Caroline, his only daughter, adjusted her sunglasses as though the brightness of the morning offended her. Matthew, the youngest, trailed behind with a smirk that masked his unease. They had not come to celebrate or reconnect. They had come to confront. Inside, Lila sat at the kitchen table, drawing with colored pencils, her feet dangling above the floor. When the doorbell echoed, she jumped. Victor put a hand on her shoulder and told her to stay put, then walked toward the entryway with the weight of history pressing on his chest. He opened the door, meeting 3 familiar faces that should have brought joy, but instead carried only accusation. Father James began, his tone clipped. "We need to talk." Victor stepped aside, though every instinct told him to keep the door closed. They entered like a board of directors preparing for a hostile takeover, their eyes scanning the house, noting the signs of change, fresh flowers on the table, sketches taped to the fridge, a child's shoes left near the staircase. Caroline's gaze sharpened. "So it's true. You've let a stranger move in here." Victor folded his arms. "Her name is Lila. She's not a stranger." Matthew let out a short laugh. "What is she then? Some charity case you're parading around to make yourself feel noble." The words cut through the air, harsh and cold. From the kitchen doorway, Lila appeared, clutching her drawing pad to her chest. She stared at the 3 adults with wide, wary eyes. Victor gestured for her to come closer. "This is Lila," he said firmly. "She has given me more honesty in a week than I've received from you in years." James scoffed. "This is absurd. You're being manipulated. Children like her are trained to tug at heartstrings. Next thing you know, she'll be after your will." Lila's lip trembled, but she stood her ground. "I didn't ask for anything," she said, her voice small but steady. "I just wanted him not to be alone." For a moment, silence filled the room. Even Victor felt the sting of her truth. He had everything. Yet it took a child with nothing to remind him what mattered. Caroline broke the silence with sharp precision. "Do you know what this looks like to the world? An old man adopting a random street child? Do you have any idea how damaging that will be to our reputation?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "Your reputation has been built on excess, scandals, and neglect. Lila's presence here is the first honorable thing attached to my name in years." James stepped closer, his voice rising. "You're losing perspective. You're willing to throw away everything we've built for what some girl you met in a park." The argument might have spiraled into shouting, But Lila's quiet voice broke through. "My dad worked for you once." The room froze. Victor turned toward her slowly, his pulse quickening. "What did you say?" Lila swallowed hard. Before he lost everything he used to say, he worked at the Langston Company. He was proud of it, said he was part of something big. But then he came home one night angry, saying people lied about him, said he stole things that he didn't. He was fired. After that, he changed, he drank, he stopped smiling, and then one day he left. Victor's breath caught in his throat. He looked at his children, their faces flickering with something darker than surprise recognition. "What was your father's name?" he asked gently. "Daniel Reyes." Lila whispered. Victor's memory churned. Years ago, he had heard whispers of layoffs and misconduct within the company. Files had crossed his desk, reports presented by senior executives. His children had championed men they had insisted were trustworthy. He had signed off without digging deeper, too consumed by expansion to notice the cost. He turned to his children, fury rising. "You knew about this." James shifted uncomfortably. He was a liability. There were rumors. There were lies Victor snapped. Lies that destroyed a man's life, a family's life, and you let it happen. Caroline's face hardened. He wasn't important. Why dwell on it now? Victor's voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of rage. Because his daughter stands in my home, and she is the living proof of your cruelty. Lila looked at the floor ashamed, though she had nothing to be ashamed of. Victor knelt beside her. "You are not a mistake, Lila. You are the reason I see the truth at last." The children exchanged uneasy glances, but James recovered quickly, his tone turning icy. "This isn't over. If you think you can replace us with her, you're mistaken. We'll see what the courts have to say about an old man adopting a child he barely knows." Victor rose to his full height, shoulders squared. "I would rather stand before every court in this country than spend another day blinded by your greed. If protecting her means fighting my own blood, then so be it." They left the mansion in silence, their anger simmering beneath polished exteriors. Outside, the cars pulled away, but Victor knew this was not retreat. It was the beginning of war. That night, as he tucked Lila into the guest room, she now called her own, she whispered, "Are they going to take me away?" Victor sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Not if I can help it. You belong here as long as you want to be here." Her eyes searched his face, looking for cracks in the promise. Finding none, she closed them and drifted into sleep. Victor lingered in the doorway, his chest heavy with both dread and resolve. He understood now the storm that was gathering. His children would not stop until they tore down what he had built with Lila. But for the first time in decades, he had something worth fighting for. Not an empire, not a fortune, but a bond forged in truth and love. The courtroom in downtown San Francisco was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Journalists filled the back rows, their pens poised cameras waiting to capture the fall of a billionaire family. At the front sat Victor Langston, calm in appearance, but with fire in his eyes, and beside him Lila, dressed in a simple blue dress that seemed both too small for the gravity of the day and yet perfect in its honesty. Across the aisle, his 3 adult children sat with their attorneys, expressions of righteous indignation carefully arranged for the public. The case had drawn national attention. An aging tycoon fighting to adopt a girl from the streets, while his own flesh and blood accused him of manipulation and senility. It was a story too compelling to ignore. Yet beneath the spectacle, Victor knew what this really was: a fight for truth, for love, and for the life of a child who had given him a reason to live again. When the judge called the court to order, the proceedings unfolded with sharp words and cold arguments. James's attorney painted Lila as an interloper, a child conveniently appearing to exploit an old man's loneliness. Caroline's lawyer suggested Victor was no longer fit to make rational decisions. Matthew's side emphasized the reputation damage to the Langston family. Each argument dripped with entitlement as though money and legacy outweighed flesh and blood. Victor's attorney responded with facts. Lila had no history of fraud, no connection to schemes. Every claim of manipulation was speculation unsupported by evidence. Medical reports confirmed Victor's mind was sound sharper than most men half his age. Witnesses from the Park Bakery testified that Lila had indeed spent her last coins to bake a birthday cake, not for gain, but for kindness. Piece by piece, the narrative of greed began to unravel. The turning point came when the judge invited Lila to speak. She stood on shaky legs, her small hands gripping the edge of the wooden podium. The courtroom hushed. She looked first at Victor, then at the stern faces of his children, and finally at the judge. Her voice trembled at the start, but grew steadier with each word. "I didn't ask Mr. Victor for money. I didn't even know he was rich. I just saw someone alone on his birthday. Nobody should be alone like that. He gave me food, a bed, and more than that, he gave me time. He listens to me. He talks to me. He makes me feel like I matter. That's something I never had before." The silence that followed was broken only by the scratching of reporters' pens. Even the judge leaned back, clearly moved. Caroline shifted uncomfortably. James clenched his jaw. Matthew rolled his pen between his fingers, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Victor rose slowly when it was his turn. His voice was firm, unshaken. "I spent my life building companies, chasing numbers, and calling it success. But when I needed family most, I was left with empty rooms and silent phones. This child, who has nothing, gave me more than all of you combined. She gave me the truth that love is measured not in dollars but in presence. I will not apologize for choosing love." The decision came swiftly. The court recognized Victor as Lila's legal guardian and dismissed the objections raised by his children. But the judge went further. After reviewing financial records, allegations of fraud and mismanagement tied to James and Caroline were referred to the district attorney. Their schemes, once hidden behind wealth, now stood exposed under the public eye. The fallout was immediate. James resigned from corporate boards under investigation. Caroline faced lawsuits that stripped away her luxury. Matthew, though less culpable, withdrew into silence, his reputation tarnished by association. For years, they had lived as heirs to an empire. Now they were left confronting the emptiness of their own choices. Victor, however, emerged not diminished, but renewed. Within weeks, he announced the establishment of the Lila Reyes Foundation, dedicated to supporting homeless children and families in San Francisco. He committed $200 million to the cause, but more than money, he gave his time. He was seen visiting shelters, speaking to children, listening to their stories. And always by his side was Lila, no longer a beggar girl, but a symbol of resilience. At the foundation's opening ceremony, she stood on stage with him, her hair brushed neatly, her smile radiant. Cameras flashed as she cut the ribbon, and Victor whispered in her ear, "This is yours, as much as mine." That evening, back at the mansion, the long dining table was no longer empty. Staff volunteers and children from the shelters gathered around, filling the house with laughter and noise. At the head of the table, Victor sat with Lila beside him. A cake was brought out, not lopsided this time, but grand, with layers of frosting and candles glowing like stars. "Make a wish, Mr. Victor," Lila said, echoing the words she had spoken on that first day in the park. He closed his eyes, but he did not wish for more years or more wealth. He wished for strength to continue this new life, one built not on legacy but on love. When he opened his eyes, he saw her smiling back, and he knew the wish was already granted. As the candles flickered out, Victor raised his glass. Family is not defined by blood. It is chosen by love and by the courage to stand by one another. May we all remember that. The room erupted in applause, but Victor barely heard it. His gaze was fixed on the little girl beside him, the one who had walked into his life with nothing but sincerity and left him with everything he had ever longed for. In that moment, he understood redemption was not about erasing the past. It was about building something new, something better. And with Lila, he had found not only renewal, but the truest legacy a man could hope for. Victor Langston's story is not just about a wealthy man and a poor little girl. It is about the collision of two worlds that were never meant to meet and yet changed each other forever. When we first saw him, Victor was a man suffocating in silence, surrounded by marble walls and priceless art, but haunted by an absence far more painful than poverty, the absence of love. His children, once the center of his universe, had long since abandoned the idea of family, replacing it with greed and entitlement. For them, their father was no longer a man, but a never-ending fountain of wealth. Then came Lila, a barefoot child from the streets of San Francisco, carrying nothing but her innocence, and a heart still capable of giving even when she had nothing left to give. She entered Victor's life on a day when he expected nothing more than loneliness. She spent her last coins, her meal for the day, on a crooked birthday cake, a gesture so pure that it shook the foundation of a man who thought he had seen it all. From that moment, everything changed. A bond was born that neither money nor blood could explain. Victor chose to embrace Lila not as a symbol of charity, but as the daughter his heart had longed for. And when his own children turned against him, attempting to strip him of dignity, power, and even his right to love, Victor stood firm. He uncovered their betrayal, faced their cruelty, and defended the one person who had reminded him what humanity truly means. The storm was violent, filled with lawsuits, accusations, and a war that tested the strength of both an old man and a little girl who had already seen too much of life's harshness. But in the end, truth prevailed. Victor found redemption not in money, not in reputation, but in the new family he chose to build with Lila. And through her, he found renewal, a reason to wake up every morning, a chance to turn his fortune into something that healed rather than destroyed. The lesson here is timeless and urgent. True wealth is not measured in dollars or possessions, but in the love we give and the love we receive. Victor had spent decades chasing success, but it took a child with empty pockets to teach him what mattered most. In our own lives, we often run the same race, working longer hours, climbing higher ladders, chasing more zeros in our bank accounts. But ask yourself, who will be sitting beside you when the world grows quiet? Who will choose you not for what you can give, but for who you are? This story reminds us that it is never too late to realign our values. You can rebuild broken relationships, choose kindness when it is least expected, and protect the people who bring light into your life. You can, like Victor, transform pain into purpose and use your own blessings to lift others. And perhaps the most powerful lesson, sometimes the smallest act of generosity, like a child's birthday cake, can rewrite an entire life. If this story touched you, if it made you reflect on your own family, your own choices, or the kind of legacy you want to leave behind, I invite you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel not just to support us, but to keep alive these stories that remind us of what truly matters. Your support gives us the motivation to bring you more heartfelt stories, lessons that inspire, and reminders that love, real love, still exists.